Parliament returned this week, and with it came renewed questions about vaccine procurement and distribution.
There is no plan B because, Mr. Speaker, there was never an effective plan A for the distribution and securing vaccines for Canadians.
What is a plan to make sure everyone in our country is vaccinated?
Frustration echoed by the provinces.
We need a loud voice to make sure that we get our fair share of vaccines.
There's a real lack of consistency of information that is flowing, and it's becoming very problematic.
This as fears of vaccine nationalism also ramp up.
This is a global environment which is extremely competitive.
So are politics getting in the way? It sure sounds like it from that pack. Are political leaders asking the right questions about vaccines? It's Thursday. I'm here with At Issue, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, and Althea Raj. Good to see everybody. Chantal, let's start with you. Obviously, we knew there were going to be delays. We didn't receive any vaccines this week. Opposition parties are trying to assign blame. They say that there's no clear plan. What is useful in this kind of situation where obviously, accountability is needed, but some of this is out of the government's hands too?
Well, it's useful in the sense of if it makes you feel better, it probably helps. But that being said, it is out of the government's hands. And what we saw this week in the House of Commons, and I am not blaming the opposition for that, is stamping your feet, or if you have kids driving a car and hearing this, are we there yet? It is not anything that the opposition has put forward that would, at this juncture, change the reality of the situation. It is also not unique to Canada. You saw it in the EU having this fight with the UK over who got vaccines and who did not. I think we're going to be seeing some of that for a few weeks still.
So, Andrew, are politicians asking the right questions, I guess, right now, or is it just getting far too political?
Well, it's the job of the opposition to hold the government to account. They're not measuring them against an absolute standard. They're measuring them against other countries. So, yes, we've been doing better than some countries, but we're now 21st overall and 35th over the last week. So if it's out of the government's hands, of the government of Canada's hands, is it out of the hands of the government of Portugal or the government of Lithuania or the government of Poland or any of these other countries that are ahead of us? If maybe they're just got lucky. If so, then there's not much to learn from that. But maybe there is something to be learned from the experience of other countries. And it's the job of the government to deliver and to be held to account on that. So I don't fault the opposition for not laying out their own full plan on this. Their job is to point out where the government is deficient.
Althea.
I don't fault the opposition, but I would say I think that both the government and the opposition could have been more transparent and less partisan this week. I think that suggesting that the government has no plan and that somehow the Conservative Party would have done better if it was in office doesn't really hold much water. I think the government could have saved a lot of anguish from the Premier side of things and from the public side of things. I mean, frankly, listening to the press conference today, it took Major General Daniel Fortin about 40 minutes to come up with something he could have said in 30 seconds, which is the discrepancy between the numbers that the premiers were given, or the provincial governments were given this morning, and the government's target of 4 million doses by the end of this quarter is because of the way that we're counting whether or not there's going to be 5 or 6 doses per vial. And if there isn't 6 doses per vial, if Health Canada says no, well, Pfizer still says it's going to deliver 4 million doses by the end of that time period. So if they could just be transparent, they said that they were going to be open by default. If maybe they could show that, there would be less anguish from the part of the public on whether or not the government is fulfilling a plan that seems to make sense.
Chantal, one thing.
It's not clear to me that there is general anguish on the part of the public, and it's not clear to me that judgment on how this operation has been handled can be made today. It will be appropriately made at some point in the future, and it's totally possible that it will be found that the government didn't live up to what it should have done. Rewind a few months back, but to do it today, not happening. And I think most Canadians are not about to judge the vaccine deployment on the basis of today or tomorrow, but at some point they will.
Althea and then
It
Andrew.
will take more time.
Althea, you want in
for
quickly,
some-
and then Andrew. Yep.
Yeah, briefly, just for some people who have, their parents in a long-term care home, I think there is anguish. And when you hear the Prime Minister say we're in good shape, that doesn't ring true.
Andrew.
Yeah, two things. One is on transparency. One thing the government has not been transparent about was its early reliance or hoped for reliance on the joint venture with China, the CanSino project, CanSino, I guess you pronounce it, project, which was very clear shortly after they had begun on it, was not going to happen, and they didn't tell anybody that until some months later. The other point is, Chantel's absolutely right that we're not going to make final judgments at any point now. It's going to be an ongoing thing. But let's put the numbers in perspective. If all goes according to plan, we will have about 3 million people vaccinated by the end of March. To get to the government's announced target of getting the entire adult population vaccinated by the end of September, we're going to have to go from 1 million a month, which is the rate we've been going up till today, to 1 million a week. There is no reason at this point to think we're going to get there, and it's going to be really interesting to see how we ramp up.
Yeah, although we are getting, 79,000 doses next week, and by 3 weeks later, we're up to almost 400,000 doses. So, if it all ramps up as planned, I suppose it could happen. Let me ask you all about the global aspect of this that we heard the minister talk about here, because vaccine nationalism, that's fundamentally what this is sort of about, and I wonder what kind of danger that poses to Canada and to others around the world, and whether we shouldn't have expected or hoped for a better approach to this. Chantal, I'll start with you.
I'm not sure it's vaccine nationalism. I can be proven wrong going down the road, but I think that every government is undergoing the same pressure from opposition parties and from people to get vaccines. And they are all reacting accordingly by saying we're going to get our hands on these vaccines. Whether that was predictable, yes, probably. We are not the US and we're not the UK, and we don't command the kind of, we're going to put the fear of God in you if you don't deliver our vaccines tomorrow. But I'm not ready to decide on any of that now.
Andrew.
In an ideal world, the countries of the world would have gotten together and negotiated en masse with the vaccine providers, because it is absolutely true that if all we do is guarantee vaccines for ourselves and leave other countries to sink or swim, that will ultimately come back to bite us. If their citizens are traveling around, they're going to infect us just as much. So the entire world has an interest in seeing to it that the entire world is vaccinated. In the world as it is, unfortunately, there is going to be a scramble and a competition for vaccines, and that is going to be where governments are measured, unfortunately, is how well they do in that competition.
Althea.
Two things. I think we are kidding ourselves if we had vaccine production capacity in this country, that there would be no pressure on the federal government to ensure that Canadians get vaccinated first before any such shipments go abroad. The other thing is that, it's almost like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. A month ago, the Canadian government was being criticized abroad, articles in the BBC and Al Jazeera, for being vaccine hoarders, because we had more pre-orders per Canadian than any other rich country in the world. And the federal government has, I think, rightfully set aside some money to help developing countries get access to the vaccine. But we would be acting in our own self-interest, and unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to do so.
Just a quick go round on what these first few days back after the Christmas break tell us about how the party leaders are positioning themselves in this moment, and knowing that the possibility of an election is looming. I'll start with you. Maybe, Althea. I know you have stuff to say about the Conservatives.
Well, I think everybody kind of was trying to carve out a certain space in the House this week, which was kind of great to see. I was actually surprised, Aaron O'Toole, you mentioned the Conservatives, gave an answer that I thought was rather interesting and surprising to a colleague from Le Devoir about his support for helping. Well, the question was asked about decriminalizing small possessions of hard drugs. Basically, this was a directive that has gone through the Justice Department, and he was asked if he agreed with this or if he thought that MPs should weigh in on this question. And he actually said that he was not in favor of harsh punishment for people who have drug problems. Interesting. And I think demonstrates that the Conservatives are really trying to expand their tent. At the same time, that evening, the Conservatives were up to their kind of, can I say, frat boy, silly boy antics with they're wearing masks, pro oil sands masks. Not that there's anything wrong with wearing a pearl oil sands mask, except you shouldn't be doing that in the House of Commons. You're not allowed to wear buttons. You're not allowed to have signs. And they were cut to that. And I'll skip ahead because I know other people have other things to say. But the Green Party is really struggling to find a voice. And lost in all this kerfuffle this week with Real News was that the Greens haven't had a question to the Prime Minister since the last election. And they're basically blaming the other parties for trying to stifle their voice.
Chantal, your thoughts?
The opposition parties, I think, realized again this week, through no fault of their own, that the resonance that they usually have when the House sits is just not there. 2 emergency debates. Erin O'Toole's problem is not that he's not sending messages to Canadians who may not have voted for the Conservatives in the past, but at this point, those messages mostly resonate with this base and not in a positive way. And that will be the case going forward for the opposition parties until the pandemic is more under control.
Andrew.
It's said in the military that no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. I think all of the parties, government and opposition, are about to find that their battle plan that they had been shaping up, which was we're going to have a big budget, have a knockdown, drag-out fight over that, maybe an election coming out of it, may get put on hold. I think everybody's plans were assuming that at some point, not too distant future, the pandemic was going to be coming under control. I think with the emergence of these variants, these much more contagious variants that are now in Canada and that may prove to be resistant to vaccines, we may find that the events overtake us, that the pandemic remains such a force in our society that election talk gets put off.
Show some leadership, Prime Minister. Your misguided appointment without proper verification, without proper consultation, has led to the sullying of a very important office to Canada's Constitution, to our Canadian Armed Forces, to our parliamentary democracy. Talk to the opposition. Put the committee back into place. The Prime Minister's office does not always know best, Mr. Trudeau.
Okay, that was the leader of the official opposition speaking earlier this week about the next steps he wants to see when it comes to appointing the next Governor General. It's now been a week since Judy Payette resigned from her role. I'm here again with Chantal, Andrew, and Althea for another round of At Issue. Not sure, Andrew, why don't you start because you wrote about it this week. I'm not sure the whole office is sullied because of Madame Payette's behavior. You would hope the institution will hold up even in spite of that. But what do you think needs to be sort of the government's next steps in this?
Well, I think certainly it would behoove the government to take it out of the sole hands of the Prime Minister. I think, whatever else we praise or decry in Stephen Harper's government, I think it was widely agreed it was a good move to move it into that committee process. It wasn't just the sole preserve of one person. Beyond that, I think we need to think about the nature and role of the Governor General. It has a symbolic and ceremonial role. But it also has functional roles that can become very important in a constitutional crisis. So you want somebody, and I admit this is a tough mix, but you want somebody who is both able to perform those ceremonial functions, but also in the crunch to be able to carry the confidence of the public. You want somebody, in other words, who is enormously respected around the country. Not just somebody who's a celebrity or a symbol of something, but somebody who in and of themselves commands people's respect by virtue of their character, by virtue of their achievements, by virtue of their dignity, their integrity, their moral force, etc. And that, as I say, that's a tall order. But we're not just picking somebody to do a job. We're also picking somebody who, in a sense, represents what we value as a country, the kinds of qualities that we value. And so I would hope we would take it more seriously than perhaps we have in the recent past.
I mean, what you just said there, the qualities we're looking for on paper, you could have argued that Madame Payette embodied some of those things. So, I mean, I take your point. I think all those qualities make sense. I would add one more, just sort of be friendly. Be someone likable.
Good, like people.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, as a basic principle. Chantal, go ahead.
I would add, please, someone have a conversation with that person about what the job really is.
Yes.
Because prestigious offer, maybe sometimes tedious job. As for the, it represents our values, on the Governor General, as on a lot of other things, I think there are divided opinions on this. Not all Indigenous people look to the Governor General's job as a reflector of values. I'm certain that the majority of Quebecers don't. But there are plenty of people who fit the bill that Andrew has described. A lot of them will not want to be Governor General because of the tedious side of it. But I would opt, like Andrew, for someone who is maybe less flashy but more solid.
But it seems to me, though, Althea, it's as tedious as you want it to be. I mean, you can sort of take on a cause or an issue and promote it and be part of a conversation in the country. I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding the job, but it seems like there are possibilities there.
I think that's true. I mean, the job is what you make it to be. There are natural things that you have to do, like bestowing the honors and whatnot. But I think to Andrew's point, the most important role is what the Governor General might play if there is, if the Prime Minister decides that he would like to request a dissolution of Parliament. And when you think back about when Mr. Harper went to visit Madame Jean, if Madame Jean perhaps had been willing to have a fight with the Prime Minister, perhaps she would have said no, that you should go face the House of Commons. And then if the House of Commons says they don't agree with you, then I will consider my options. So you want somebody who has the respect, and I agree with Andrew here, who has the respect that would it come to a situation like that, the public would trust them to make the appropriate decision, even if it means battling the Prime Minister in the media, where the Governor General is not an active player, and you would not, assume that she would be or he would be out there doing media interviews about what their decision was. So that's really important, and I don't think that we should overlook that. And I just want to say that I agree with Chantal about explaining to the governor, the potential Governor General, what the role is, but also about the vetting process. I think one thing that we've learned from this experience is that you really, like any other job, you should check your references.
And maybe explaining to me what the role is, because I saw Chantal's face when I made that comment. But
No, it's okay. I mean, if you're happy with the ribbon cutting and having a cause, I think you're having more fun in your actual job than you would as Governor General, but that's just me. But I would add to Althea's point that, yes, it's important, but it's also important to keep in mind that over the past 150 years, that's happened it happened once that the Governor General refused the advice of the Prime Minister, and maybe it happened another 2 times that there was a choice. So if you're taking on the job, and you're sitting on the edge of your seat hoping things will go so wrong that you'll have a chance to say yes or no, maybe not take the job.
Yeah, it's not going to be high drama, Andrew, and that should not be your expectation going in.
Well, a couple of things have changed, though. One is that we're much more likely to have minority parliaments than we have been in the past. They're an increasingly common phenomenon in Canada. And secondly, we have this unresolved conflict over this. There are people, certainly within the Conservative Party, perhaps outside the party, who do not necessarily accept that you can transfer power from one government to another without having an intervening in election. People were challenging the very legitimacy of that point of view. So if that's the case, then the Governor General might more come into play. And thirdly, we don't have as bad a situation as the United States does, but we have much more polarized politics than we did perhaps in the past. So all these things add up, it seems to me, to making more likely, not less, that we might find ourselves in a, whatever you want to call it, a crisis or at least a controversy. A
moment of drama. Let me just do one quick go around then on beyond sort of the characteristics that you all sort of agree on in terms of what we would need to see. What should the government look for it to also symbolize something? Because that is their tendency in these kinds of appointments that I hear you all deeply sign, but it's true. That's what they usually go for. Chantal, you start.
I'm not sure that that's a proper criteria to represent something, because it's putting a lot on someone's shoulder, and it kind of detracts from the role. If you want to represent something, run for office, recruit people to your party, and present them to voters.
Althea, same question.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people in the government who would love to see an Indigenous person appointed to be Governor General. But I think maybe the government has learned its lesson. Like, they really wanted to appoint a Supreme Court justice that was an Indigenous person, and then they realized that maybe that there were other options that they should be leaning towards, and that's the way they ended up going. So I think the focus for a celebrity or an icon or somebody that represents something, a message that they wanted to send, that has been dialed back a little bit in the last few years. So we'll see.
Last word to you, Andrew.
I'm not averse to that being part of the mix, as long as the other qualities are there.
Yep.
So, for example, if they were to pick
Agreed.
a name out of the hat, if they were to appoint Senator Murray Sinclair, retiring Senator Murray Sinclair, I think a lot of people would say that's an extraordinarily high-quality person who commands a great deal of respect in the country. So that way you're getting both, the best of both worlds.
Okay. That was also a good conversation. Lots of things I hadn't thought about. Thank you all. Appreciate it.